There's a wonderful woman named Sandra Uttley in Scotland. She wrote this book called Dunblane Unburied, published in 2006. So that was 10 years after the event, and now today is almost 18 years since it happened. It was a school shootout. 20 children were killed at one time, and a man named Hamilton was blamed, and her theory, more than a theory because she's proved it, is that the real baddies were probably involved, that Mr. Hamilton, but many other police and judges. And how did they get around their guilt? I mean, you have to think of it, that whenever a member of government behaves criminally, they automatically have this amazing protection, you know, because they can keep secrets and because people are just afraid to, they don't even notice that they can do something about it. So, as she points out, a man, she says, his name is William W. Scott, and he's a businessman from North Berwick, and he decided, and she said, made persistent and valiant efforts to get the truth about this. And he did. So I'm going to read, it's from her book, but she's really quoting him. So when I say I did this and that, it means I, William Scott. My interest in the Cullen inquiry into the Dunblane tragedy began in 1999 when I read that Lord Burton had requested that a report to the inquiry, you know, like a Warren Commission, by a Sergeant Hughes be placed in the House of Lords Library. He was informed by Lord Sewell that this was not possible due to it being subject to the 100-year closure order. And this exchange is recorded in Hansard, i.e. Congressional Record. The Lord Advocate at the time warned Lord Burton not to make any further inquiries. I thought that 100 years was a rather long time, since cabinet papers are only sealed for 30 years. So I wrote to my MP. He wrote to the Lord Advocate on my behalf. After 5 months and repeated reminders, the Lord Advocate informed Mr. Robertson, my MP, that the closure was imposed to protect the identity of children. That is, until those children will be 105 years old, I guess. The Lord Advocate in the same letter categorically stated that the closure was proposed by the Scottish Record Office and that other documents were also subject to that closure. It is public knowledge who signed the documents to allow Thomas Hamilton to legally own handguns. Mr. Robertson said, for the 100-year restriction, my next move was to communicate with the Keeper of Records of the National Archives of Scotland. This may all sound a bit tedious to you, but this is so important that he knew what laws exist and so forth, and where these things are, and we should all know these things, and usually it's pretty simple to find out. His reply left no room for misunderstanding. He informed me that he had no responsibility whatsoever for the imposition of the closure periods, and that it was entirely a matter for the body responsible for the creation of the records. He further went on to explain that there is no statutory basis for the closure of records created by Scottish public bodies. Okay, so that's in itself pretty amazing. Since it has been established that there was no statutory authority, I wondered from where the Lord Advocate derived the right to deny access. Again, my MP wrote to him, and the reply was a typical lawyer's letter with much that was irrelevant. Lord Cullen, that was the one who had the inquiry going, stated that there was no evidence of criminal behavior on the part of Thomas Hamilton prior to the shooting. But of course, he may not consider the abuse of children a criminal offense. So, who are the children named in the productions? If they were not abused by Hamilton, who was guilty of interfering with these children? Even now, the Lord Advocate is only agreeing to release some of the papers, since he said there are some that are too sensitive to be made public. Witnesses were not called. I considered that the most compelling key to many of these so-called spree killers and others. When you see that witnesses who were available and the grassy knoll witnesses, you know, queuing up to try to get at the Warren Commission for Kennedy, and they weren't called, they weren't allowed to tell the story. Well, that, you hardly even need go further than that, in my Mary Maxwell's opinion. Right, witnesses were not called who could have provided crucial evidence. A police officer who was in the school at the time of or shortly after the shooting. He advised the first ambulance crew to arrive that it was safe to enter the gym as Hamilton was dead. On a matter as serious as this, a police officer would have confirmed the facts himself before advising the ambulance crew. So the officer had definitely been in the gym. Here was an officer present at the scene, trained to observe and give evidence. Why was he not called? When I raised this point to the Lord Advocate, I was told that a trainee teacher had seen Hamilton shoot himself. This only made me more suspicious, as the trainee teacher was not called to give evidence either. Hamilton's body was quickly cremated, which of course makes it now very difficult to discover exactly what happened in the last minutes of his life. When reading the transcript of the inquiry, I noticed that a Dr. Beatty, when questioned about it, said on the evening of the shootings, Dr. Beatty, with events still clear in his mind, told reporters at a press conference that he did not see Hamilton's body in the gym. There are many theories concerning Hamilton's death and the moving of the body, but I have restricted myself to the almost certain fact that at 10:15 on March 13, 1996, the body of Hamilton was not in the gym. Dr. Beatty seemed to be the obvious person to me, William Scott, to settle the matter, so I wrote to him at York Hill Hospital. I sent copies of the original. My letters were not returned, so I had no way of knowing if he received them. I decided to send an email. This prompted a reply from Dr. Beatty, which I now tell you. I only reply lest your conspiracy theory is reinforced. I simply suggest you read all the evidence. For my part, please note that I will regard any future contact from you or your group as harassment and will take the necessary action. All I had asked was whether the body of so-and-so was in the gym. There was no mention on my part of any of the doubts many have over the death of Hamilton, so why did he mention a conspiracy? Okay. No need to pursue that any further, other than to say, for example, a housemaster at Queen Victoria School alleged that Thomas Hamilton had access to the facilities at the school and that there were other unauthorized visitors. He reported his suspicions to his superiors, but instead of being praised, his flat was raided by the police, his computer confiscated, and he was forced to resign. You know, that's just a typical story. I want to mention that one happy note came to me reading about that. Well, Dr. Beatty didn't want to say what he should say, but in the Pat Tillman inquiry, which the mother of Pat Tillman persisted against all odds to find out, the doctor who did the autopsy and was asked to sign it falsely as to, how Tillman died, he refused to sign it. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, that man deserves like a big celebration from us all. I don't know his name, and he's in the military, so he's probably been sent to a combat area and killed off by now. All right, just finally, in closing her book, now remember this is written by Sandra Uttley, she says, I respectfully request that the British government censure the Lord Advocate for instigating and perpetuating a cover-up of the truth at the Dunblane inquiry in dereliction of his duty. And she says, in denying us the full truth about Dunblane, the government dishonors the dead. Okay?